Working as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle. Thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. On a Saturday, the weekend is finally here. We're streaming to you 10:30 Eastern Time on rumble.com/amradpod. As always, guys, reminder, make sure that you smash the thumbs up and follow the program. If you want to subscribe, we always appreciate it. Definitely subscribe to the audio formats of the show on iTunes and Spotify and iHeart so we can continue to grow and expand, radicalizing more Americans one episode at a time. It's the weekend, and we have an unusual episode for ourselves. We don't normally do guests, but when we have somebody who we think will be interesting to the American Radicals Podcast audience, we are anxious to bring those perspectives here. So today we're going to be talking about the Untamed Truth with the purveyor of theuntamedtruth.com, Mr. Joe Oltmann, who is a friend to the Suspendables, who's interviewed us many times. And whenever you talk to Joe, it's a little bit unusual because he's kind of like a Forrest Gump. He's done a whole bunch of things. He's just popped up here or there, and you just get little snippets. But I want to get the whole story today because I don't even think I know it all, and I'm anxious to get to that. I'm anxious to get to @GOB Actual's reactions to that as well. Garrett O'Boyle, my friend and co-host on the AmRad Pod. Hope you're having a great day, Garrett. You ready to talk to Joe?
I'm ready. Let's just get right to it.
But without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend. Let's throw him up there. How you doing today,
fellas?
Oltmann?
I'm living the dream. Glad to be with you.
Well, I sort of teased it in the beginning that you've interviewed Garrett and me and the other suspendables like our friend Kyle Seraphin, and you do a good job. You kind of like keep your own personal story, but then every once in a while, a little bit seeps through, and I've been able to like pull out one at a time. I feel like I'm reading a book and I read chapter 4 and then 9, and then maybe went back to 3 and 13. I want the whole story. I want the wave tops, though. Who is Mr. Joe Oltmann, and where are you these days? Because every time I talk to you, you're going somewhere different.
So I'm in Denver right now. I'm at the office. We had some technical difficulties in the studio, so I'm actually talking to you on the laptop. But yeah, I'm just a regular guy. I mean, really, that's the whole deal. I grew up very poor. I'm in Denver. I have a place in San Antonio, so I split my time between Texas and Colorado. And I found myself involved in this quite by accident. I mean, I'm a tech CEO. I also own gun stores and ranges, and I've invested in probably, a half dozen to a dozen, actually more like a dozen businesses over the last 15 years. And frankly, I've done some pretty cool stuff in my life. And if I never had to get involved in politics, it would be amazing, but I don't think that's what God had in plan for me. So here I am.
Cheers to that.
Joe, so you grew up poor. Where are you from, man? You don't have like an accent. You don't sound like you're from like the Bible Belt down south. You don't have the Wisconsinite accent going. Where are you from?
Yeah, hey there, hey there. I'm from Washington D.C., the DMV. Grew up there. I was actually born in Winchester, Virginia, and then from there moved around. My parents were just kids having kids when they had me. My mom was, I think, 17 when she had me. She was 15 when she had my brother. I'm one of 8. I'm coming from a melded family, so my father and my mother got divorced when I was very young. Met my dad. My dad, in essence, raised me. Left home when I was 15. I was, just it wasn't the most ideal environment. Sold drugs when I was 16, so I had the opportunity to do that. That was kind of fun.
It's okay. We're not feds
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. I believe that people are a product of their environment, and I've done really, really well. And I think part of the reason I did well is that I was able to escape some of the chaos that was created when I was younger. That my brother didn't get to escape. So my brother was murdered by a police officer in 2017. He was run off the road into a wall at 90 miles an hour, and yeah, he was running away from the police. But that's kind of what you do in the DMV. He was a motorcycle guy, and but it didn't deserve being killed over. But that's a much longer story. Anyway, so that's kind of melds it. Went to school, came to Colorado 29 years ago, and my life has been kind of a whirlwind since then.
Where'd you go to school?
Maryland. Yeah.
You did some. I've heard you talk about going overseas. So, I mean, in what capacity was that? Because you were doing some sort of work, like as a diplomat, from what I understand, that you've been able to explain. So you're saying, like, I'm a regular guy, but I've represented the country's interests abroad. That seems like kind of a resume highlight.
Yeah, so this is where it gets into where I say I'm just a regular guy. I've done a lot of crazy stuff in my life and found myself in places that frankly I had no business being, at tables that I had no business being at. And it kind of all started in a catastrophic business failure. I thought I was, that people used to call me the golden child. Like I would get involved in something and I would do really well. That's why I tell everyone I was like the Forrest Gump of business. But in 2007, I had a couple businesses and got defrauded by a hedge fund, lost a bunch of money, and really, I think that's where my journey started. And I call it the God, kind of the God path. Like God picked me up, found me, decided that I was, one, worth saving, and two, that He had different plans for me. So later that year, I went to Saudi Arabia, then Bahrain, then Lebanon, then parts of North Africa, and I didn't go there with the idea that I was going to get involved in business or that I would get involved in any of the things that I did in that region. Frankly, I was a broken guy. I was a guy that had a lot of money, driving around in really nice cars, living in a beautiful couple $1 million home. But I found myself trying to figure out what life was all about. I was trying to run away from business. Anytime you blow up companies, even if it's not your fault, you still have to take responsibility for what happened. So mismanaging people, mismanaging capital. And so that was kind of a wake-up call for me. And because I grew up in an environment where I didn't have anything, that was one of my greatest fears, is that I would be poor again. And so I was able to, go on these trips and kind of learn about different parts of different cultures. And as I got involved in those cultures, they would bring up problems. And I was like, well, I'm not that bright. My books were lighter. They had less information in them. So I went to a state school. So, but if I were you, this is what I would do. And I would draw out, kind of a solution to their problem. And the more that I did that without expecting anything in return, the more it started to just like wildfire spread that, hey, you just talk to this guy, Joe. And so I found myself working in places where I got to raise a bunch of cash for some important people. And then I got to, go into Saudi Arabia and solve some problems that they had with, a US based company. And then somebody asked me to go into Kenya and then Uganda. And then I found myself in Ghana. And then I found myself in, it's just a crazy turn of events. Now, the ultimate goal that I had was never to make money at that point. I wanted to serve God. I seriously just wanted I wanted my life to matter. I wanted the things that that I was associated with or I was doing to have meaning. And because I was so entrenched in being chasing the dollar for so long, to me, I didn't feel like that's where God wanted me. So I went over there and did a bunch of crazy stuff. I worked in Sudan. I met with President al-Bashir. I met with King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia before he passed. I also sat in the underground bunker with a missionary group with Muhammad Hussein Fallah, the head of the Hezbollah, before he passed away. So I have seen it all. I've seen people get chopped up on the streets of Kenya. I've seen I've been in countries where I was not allowed to take my passport, that I just had to walk across the border. I've been taken into areas where, and by the way, I never did this for the US government. I always did this for other interests. And the idea is that if I could solve a problem that was directly related to, they call it humanity, right? While I could also talk to them about faith or talk to them about, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, and how that kind of plays in the world, in the world markets for domestic and foreign policy, then that's what I concentrate on. And just as quickly as I went into it for those 6 years, I stepped out of it. And when I stepped out of it, I stepped out because I was in Doha, Qatar. I just got and met with Sam El-Haj, Guantanamo Bay prisoner 345. And which how am I sitting at Al Jazeera having a conversation with a guy who was in Guantanamo Bay for a couple of years? And, how in the world am I sitting in front of a guy that's one of the, when I met with Bashir, why am I in Kanata Sugar? Why am I having conversations about, foreign policy in the United States? Why am I talking to, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, or having people in different parts of North Africa, just that are there to cause chaos? How am I, writing white papers about what happens in a war-torn area? And so I found myself in a really weird situation. But it was all centered on how do I get to peace and reconciliation in areas that that I could share Jesus with.
At one point, you said I was a broken man, and God saved you. Can we dig into that a little bit? Because when I came on your show, this is probably my favorite piece. Is we talked about our faith a lot throughout that interview, more than most places. Usually, I'm just kind of interjecting it here and there, not really digging in a ton. I kind of do that elsewhere a little bit here on AMRAD and whatnot, but that really interests me because that's a similar driving force. I think even in this current role that Steve and I find ourselves in, that, well, really even just that, we didn't really find ourselves here. God laid this path. We just didn't know it, and we just continue to march, hopefully in accordance with his will. So can you dig into that a little bit for us?
I would love to. I mean, look, I went to meet, I was in a really bad environment. Things were not going well. Every time I would look for an open door, the doors would close on the business side. And somebody said, "Hey, I want you to go listen to this man talk about Jesus." And I got to tell you something. Like I believed in God and like I was always there, but it was a God of convenience. In other words, I lived my life the way I wanted to live. I wasn't necessarily faithful. I was married previously for 5.5 years. I think I was faithful during that time, about 3 days, right? And my wife now of 23 years, we've been together 23 years. That's a different relationship, and so we were, I was new in that relationship while we're going through this, 6 years in, or 5 years in, and I didn't find myself being honest about my life, like how I would go to the clubs and hang out with pro athletes and drive around in my $300,000 cars. And, I never did drugs, but I drank a lot, and all the things that you should not do in your life while you have small children, I was doing. But I was a great dad. Like I'd show up and I'd coach soccer for my son. And so I was using that as a barometer for the, kind of how I was positioning myself in front of my children. And so when you tie all of who you are to money, like that's your identity, like you made it. You have all the things that people say that you should be shooting towards. And then you go and you sit in front of this pastor that talked about taking Jesus out of a box. And I remember I just couldn't stop thinking about God. I couldn't stop thinking about Jesus. And when things were going really bad, it wasn't really on my mind. It wasn't like I thought about, let me just pray to God that he fixes this for me. It was more of a, well, this sucks, right? How am I going to get through all this stuff? And I'm a relatively, nothing about me being a warrior has changed. Like I got to tell you something. I believe that bad things happen and you have to work the problem. So in my entire life, it's always been work the problem, work the problem, work the problem. So I remember going home and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I just got into the Word. I started reading the Bible. And it was about, oh man, I want to say about 5 months later. I had no idea what I was going to do. I mean, I was trying to examine how the failure happened. I was dealing with lawsuits. I was dealing with all sorts of problems that come from this failure. And look, I got defrauded by a hedge fund out of $10.5 million. They stole my development capital. But the reality of it is that I could have survived it if I wasn't such an ass. If I didn't have so much hubris and thought that I was too big to fail or that somehow I could brute myself out of it. So I mismanaged people and capital. I had to take responsibility for it. And I remember the moment that I'm sitting, this is going to be.
I get like this, Joe. So our audience is used to
it. Look, my life for the last 18 years has been incredible. Even the bad parts of the last 4 years, the last 18 years of my life, even before that, like having the ability to know that somewhere along the line, God's like looking out for me. Because even in failure, there was this huge thing that came out of it. A beautiful relationship with my children, realigning all of my values, making sure that I honored my wife, doing things in my community to make sure I honor people around me, and living my life by a standard that I think is very difficult for people to live by. And I've done that for 18 years and without unapologetically. But I remember the day that I just figured out that I didn't want my kids to be poor. I've lost all this money. I'm driving around in a $150,000 car, and I can't afford to pay my cell phone bill. It's a crazy feeling, right? And you walk into your house, you got this beautiful home that's worth a lot, and you're just trying to figure out how to move things around so you can at least eat and get access to things. And then there's this immense amount of shame that came over me, and I felt guilty, but I didn't want my kids to be poor. And so I wrote letters to, I think I've done this like 3 times where I told Kyle this. If it helps someone, great. But I wrote letters to my children, my ex-wife, my wife, my family. I called to make sure that my insurance policy that I had was up to date, and that I would ask questions about so I made sure I understood the policy, that the suicide policy had gone away so that it was still intact. And then I sent my wife to go get her nails done. And then hey, Apollo, if you're there, can you go upstairs on my desk and grab that thing that I have on my desk? The little, so so I loaded my gun and I put plastic down and bullet. And well, shit, guys.
Sorry,
I loaded my gun, put plastic down, called my friend and said, hey, listen, don't let Erica in. Here's what's about to happen. I appreciate all your work. Make sure you take care of my family. And I laid the plastic down and I loaded the gun and I put the gun to my head and I pulled the trigger.
Misfire.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that bullet sits on my desk and has for 18 years. And so when I went to the Middle East and Africa, I just tried to get myself killed. I mean, literally, that's how I lived my life. I was so reckless. It was unbelievable. Here you go. Thanks, man. Yeah. And by the way, I didn't even know guns very well back then. It was been a really bad day to put a FMJ full metal jacket bullet through your head. But you can see that the primer's tapped.
He's struck.
And so I'm on borrowed time. And so my entire life has been a blessing. And I got to see my kids graduate and then go on to do great things. I got to see amazing things happen in the Middle East and Africa. I got to see people come to the Lord. I played football with gang members on Saturday. I can still throw a football 60 yards on a string. I got to see men come to Jesus who, I volunteer my time for incarcerated men. And I've done this, by the way. I've been mentored. It used to be, teenagers that got hooked up into the crime world, because I recognize that there's a certain amount of circumstance in people's life that doesn't allow them to see past the fog or the lack of opportunity in front of them. And so I've been able to just build amazing relationships and sit on boards and build 2 tech companies. And when I made a decision after those 6 years, and I was sitting in Doha on the bench. I was the guy. Like, people loved me. I was speaking at events that Muslim American Society would bring me in because I'd talk about I was like, I kid you not, being like the Forrest Gump of things. People would say something to me. I was like, well, that's not true. And I'd like knock on the back of the chest you put my left hand in the middle of the room or the table to grab food in a Muslim country. I look, if you could screw up, I screwed up every which way. But people loved the idea that I was authentic, and I would tell people the truth, which was it hurt people at times because I wrote about Darfur and the fact that there was no ethnic cleansing or genocide. I looked at the Millennium Villages that Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia says were going to solve poverty, and that was all a lie. It was just a ruse. And I got to see foreign policy and CIA people that caused really bad problems, and USAID food. They're just figuring this out now. I got to tell you something. In 2009, they were taking USAID food, grain, and they were selling it on the black market and making sure families got access to none of it. So it was just, I got to see things over there that would shake your foundation. Pastors that went over there to sleep with young women that were there to help people while they really just hurt people. And organizations like the World Vision that spent $300 million in Kibera, and then the only thing to show for it was pit latrines. Right? They weren't solving problems. So there's just a lot of things that I got to see. And then I came home and I cut grass at my event venue that we built as a family, which was really successful. And as I'm rebuilding my life, and I would get paid a ridiculous amount of money to go overseas to solve problems. And yet it all stemmed from the idea that God he gave me back my life and said, you said that if I saved you, that you would serve me. And so
Amen.
Here I am. Which is why I share all of your stuff, Garrett. And I call Kyle and say, hey, Garrett's on fire. You need to check in on him, make sure he's okay. You see his post, and he'll tell you. I send posts to him all the time, like, hey, look at what Garrett's saying. I think he's not in a good place right now. So
yeah. Honestly, you're probably right. More often than not, you can probably discern that, I'm sure, just from our conversations we've had and our mutual faith. So thank you for that, because I didn't even know that was happening. But Kyle and Steve and others check in on me on occasion, and it takes a village sometimes. This does not measure up to what you just told us, but we do have a requisite movie reference on our show. And Man on Fire... Man on Fire has long been a pinnacle for me, and I couldn't tell you how many times I've seen it. And that scene where Denzel does what you did, and he gets the dimpled bullet, and then he goes on to fulfill his mission, and he in a large way he becomes a new man. But that's just a fictional hero's journey. Because now, like Steve said in the beginning, we get bits and pieces. We're getting a lot bigger picture of who and what Joe Oltmann is. And to me, as a brother in Christ, it's beyond encouraging to hear your life story and to hear how you got from where you were to where you are, and how God used you, is using you, and pulled you from those depths. And I'm certain that there are people who are listening right now who are in a similar bottom pit. They're in the pit and they're saying, Lord, pull me out of the pit. I don't deserve to be in the pit. I don't want to be in the pit. Pull me out. What would you say to someone who is perhaps thinking, this is it, I'm done. I'm gonna self eject?
There's a lot to be said to that person, because you don't realize that everyone puts their loneliness in what they can see, right? So you look around and you're like, your wife's not there, your kids aren't there. People are disengaged. They can't see the pain that you have. They can't see what's really going on inside. And I think that's been my superpower, is that I see people and I see dead people. So and I don't mean that from the standpoint that I actually see dead people, but I see, when I look at someone, I can say there's a lot of junk in their trunk, and I'll look at their mannerisms. I got to read people really well. And I think that the thing that people miss in society is we walk past some of the most, we walk past people that are angry, and we don't understand that anger is really pain. And so I'd tell people that, you're not alone. And there's a lot of Joe Oltmanns out there, people that truly do truly recognize that look, life was never meant to be easy. But if you wait long enough, the worst fires in the world, they do end. Like, everything ends. Like, all the worst feelings that you have in your heart, they end. But you just have to, you have to plant the seeds. You have to plant the seeds. And I would tell people that even if you don't believe in God, hedge your bets. Just give God a chance to talk in your life. And it could be as simple as, like, if you're real, give me a flat tire. I wouldn't ask for a flat tire, but do something in my life, and then just be willing to recognize that it might not be good. Like, what happens in your life to lead you to be able to make that change, it might be awful. You might go through one of the most awful things you've ever been through in your life. And through that will come something so beautiful. You just gotta, my relationship with my wife, I don't leave a conversation without telling my wife that I love her. Right. I have a beautiful relationship with my children. I have some of the best friends and people that I've gotten to know through the last 4 years. And the last 4 years has been terrible. I have an AR-15 next to my bed, and bulletproof glass, and thermal cameras, and people hate me. Like, leftists hate me, and I'm okay with it. Like, I'm okay, whatever. I carry a gun and I have covered my back, but other than that, I still don't want it to take away who I am as a person, and the fact that my job it will always be to hold people accountable, bad people accountable, because God made me a warrior. He made me a guy that, if you walk up to me and you try to do harm to me or my friends or family, man, you better have made peace with God, because I'm about to send you to him, right? Well, at the same time, recognizing that I don't want to do that. I don't want to. I don't want to hurt anyone. I was in. If I can tell the story, and I know I've taken
fire away
the mic, but
send it.
I was in Arizona when it was the election in 2022. I went there to hold a rally. They had stolen the election in 2022. They had the counting center, and none of the ballots made sense. Everything was bad. And so David Clements and I went in and we spoke. And we basically, before that, I told David, I was like, I'm not in a good place. Like, I'm going to get up there and scream and yell at people. And so he prayed over me, and I had this amazing calmness. And I walked in and I just said, listen, we have to get to a point where we can have honest debate. So I was very eloquently spoke. And then David gets up and he goes, my name is Slave. he just raw. He just hammers the people up front. He goes, you don't have 2 minutes. That's arbitrary. And the people in the back are clapping. And I'm like, what happened to Dave? What happened to him? This is crazy. And we walked out. And we're standing on the outside. And there's a guy, it's a Native American Indian that walks by. And he's just bad-mouthing, just F this, F that, looking right at us. What do you want? And I was like, why don't you come say it to me? Why don't you come right over here and say it to me? What do you got to say? You want to say it to me? Come on over here. Right? And he's like, yeah, what? And I was like, come on, let's go. I was ready to fight. Like, I saw it as a fight. And as he got closer, they had the video. Did you guys have the video? Paul, you were there. Were you there? Who was there? There's a video of this. Like, they took a video. They were like, oh, Joe's about to throw this guy around like a monkey wrench, right? And so as he gets closer, I see this immense amount of pain in this guy. And so when he gets all the way over to me, I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, what do you got to say? Go ahead. Tell me what you have to say. And he just started talking. And I was like, I feel for you, brother. Hey, can I pray over you? And I prayed over this guy. Right? This guy that wanted to fight. And as he got closer, you could just see the pain in his eyes. And I was like, okay, well, let's have this conversation. I should send it to you guys so you can see it. It's a fascinating conversation with the guy. And to this day, I still talk to him. I still talk to him on his phone. So I just send him a word of encouragement every now and then. Hey, the Lord loves you. How's things going on in your life? And, he finally has a job and he's off drinking, right? Or he's lying to me because I haven't. Right? Two things can be true at the same time. It could be true or it could be not true.
So you are from the DMV area. You said you weren't into politics, and now you've talked about how you're getting involved with elections. When did that switch get flipped?
So look, I've read more books than I think that the average person even knows exist. I've probably read 2,500 books. I'm in the middle of 2 more books right now that, and I read both sides. I've read The Art of War probably, I don't know, a dozen times. I know pretty much everything about Martin Luther King that you could possibly know. And I know he's a very controversial individual. I also know he was a Marxist. And I think that they misunderstand the flaws of man and assign that to the fact that God doesn't use imperfect men, because he does. And so I'm a system architect. So for me, I don't know how my mind works. It's just a mathematical mind. And if you spend any amount of time with me, it becomes very obvious that I can see things within that structure mathematically. So I can solve problems very quickly. And I built a company on it. I built a company that's one of the larger first-party data aggregators in the nation. We service big clients. We had a mock infrastructure e-commerce business, and I was into data. I know data really well. I know how to build data, how to build personas, how to dissect the psychographic, geographic, behavioral data that you have on every individual on a one-to-one basis, and then how do you deploy that to help businesses talk to someone that would likely engage in their product, both at a high level, big enterprise companies, all the way down to the community. And so when I got involved in the election, it wasn't the election I got involved in. It was March of 2020, and they shut everything down. Like, I had zero desire to get back into it. I was just getting nominated as Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year for the second time. I was nominated in 2019. I was nominated in 2020, right? So that's a prestigious award you get for building a tech company that's awesome. I was debt-free, never took $1 of outside capital. I was in the community. I sat on every board. I was thinking outside the box on how you actually dissect and deploy it on data, no matter if you were doing it on a business case basis or you're doing it on the political side. And I'd gotten involved a little bit in how we deploy on campaigns to help candidates get elected, right? And I rightfully knew that President Trump won in 2016 because I even bet on it. I walked into the GOP thing and I was like, what's up? How you got? Trump's going to blow. He's going to win. And they all look somber. And they're like, Joe, you don't know. He has a 1% chance of winning. And I was like, yeah, they're retarded. Those people are retarded. He's gonna win. Like, it's not impossible. Again, didn't know elections, March of 2020 changed my life forever. I'm getting ready to sell my company in 2021 for a lot of money, a lot. I'm the darling of the tech world. They write articles, give me awards, talk about all the stuff that I've done on the philanthropic side. Every client that we touched was literally turning to gold. Fast forward just a month, right? And I'm watching what they're doing by shutting down our economies. And I was like, oh, I've seen this before. I've seen this out before. They did this overseas. But this is straight out of the playbook. And I was like, they're just balling the Constitution up, throwing it in the trash. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. Again, God puts me on a path, and I felt like I was almost like a puppet. Like I was doing and saying things and getting involved and calling people in the community. I was watching people burn to the ground. I was in real time, people losing their everything that they had, right? They were losing it because of this COVID thing. And then from that, I stood up for people in the community. I started funding technology to help restaurants stay open specifically. I then made that open source and gave it away. I was one of the first people to build tech that allowed for people to just do online orders that would tie through API into their system so that people could just come pick up their food and leave. You go, well, why'd you do it? I paid a guy just to go out and help small businesses talk to people. So I would pay someone to just go out there and spotlight them, and then I would spend money. And I'm talking about the hundreds of thousands of dollars a month I was spending. But I wanted to protect my community. So this is just in Colorado. And then when, the Summer of Love started in early June, by that time we had now found out that children were being groomed by schools and being taught weird stuff. Parents didn't know. And now I'm like, oh, this is on. You don't get to mess with the children. And it just snowballed. And then I built an organization called FEC United. I would use data to drive 4,000 people to the Capitol to protest. They started writing bad articles about me for the first time ever. And again, I kept just telling them, look, I'm sorry, but the reality of it is you don't get to take away free will from people. You don't get to assess and be their daddy. Nobody asked you to be anybody's daddy. And so when I did that led to people writing bad things about me and doing these interviews. And then they started calling me all sorts of names, right-wing extremist. Nobody ever called me right-wing or left-wing anything before that. And then all of a sudden I'm this, I've been called the token Christian sitting on boards, right? Oh, yes, token conservative Joe. Oh. And I would talk to guys that are far left. I mean, my business partner's a gay married Jewish father of two who used to be a Bernie Sanders guy. I finally got him over to our side, right? But I loved on that guy and accepted him where he was, not where I wanted him to be. And he turned out to be one of the most ethically minded men you'll ever meet. Married a woman, still married to her, right? Because he wanted to be a good father. And despite all the things that went through his head or he felt, he honored his relationship with her, which is, I don't know of many men that could do that, frankly. That's honest about it. And he was. And so, as the wheels started turning and they started attacking me, look, if you come at me, I'm all about the fight. I've never seen a fight I didn't like, both physical or it doesn't matter what matters. If it's right, right is right. My dad said, what's right is rarely popular. What's popular is rarely right. Let's get it on, right? Let's go, right? And so from there, I had 800 people show up to these meetings, and I'm talking about how we go and get in the middle of town council meetings and tell them, look, we're not going to beg for permission. Like, we're Americans. Like, we're not going to ask permission. We're not going to take a vaccine. And then I interviewed Bobby Kennedy, and then I went and helped I started learning about vaccines, which I didn't know about before. And then the more I got into it, the more polarizing my voice became. And then I would show up and I would empower people we would have meetings twice a week, and 500 to 800 people would show up to every meeting. It was unbelievable. And we would go out and we would just beat the hell out of the leaders. We go right back in it, do the same thing, work the problem, go back out. And so when Antifa came out and they started burning buildings, I met with Tig Tigan. Do you know Tig?
No, I don't.
John Tigan, Benghazi, 13 Hours.
Yep.
I know of him. I've got the book, watched the movie, all that, seen some podcasts, but don't know him personally or anything.
He's exceptional.
I believe it.
And he's the guy he's every bit of the guy that was in Benghazi, protecting people he didn't know. He did the same thing in 2020. He's like, I want to start this organization. I was like, I'll help you do it. So I stood up UADF, United American Defense Force, right next to FEC. I funded it. Again, I put another, I don't know, 300-400 grand into that and built out an entire platform so they could get men together. This is when like all the what is it? What's the Proud Boys, all those organizations that were all working together and saying, okay, now we have this organized group of men around the country that can make a difference. And so then they started calling me a militiaman and all this other stuff. Okay, now in the middle of all that, I was nominated and confirmed as a finalist for Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year. They're like grooming me through this process, right? And saying, Joe, can you please shut up? Can you stop talking? Just stop for a minute.
Just go back to making money.
Go back to making money.
Mm-hmm.
And I got calls from people everywhere. Joe, shut your mouth. Like, you're going to win. Just shut your mouth. And I was like, yeah, I can't. I don't know if I could do that.
Can't do that.
And so that led me into, going out there and on the streets and stopping them from burning buildings down. So I'm this tech CEO that literally puts on a T-shirt, goes out and beats the hell out of Antifa members that are trying to, side by side with TIG. And I started goading the Antifa and calling them what they were, Queen Tifa, and saying, look, you come into the community, you're going to need a dentist. We're going to send you to get new teeth. You're going to need new teeth. And by this time I'm belligerent. And that led to being on that call with Eric Coomer, which happened in September-ish. And then, we saw the election happen. I lost the deal for Ernst & Young's, greatest award. And I was okay with it. But then I thought, I'll still sell my company, no big deal. November 3rd happened. November 6th, I'm up elk hunting. And I had written out all these notes about Eric Coomer and before validated who he was, but I still had no idea about Dominion voting systems. Like, I didn't know they were in 50% of the states. Nobody did. I mean, did you know any of that?
No.
I mean, you guys, it wasn't even on your radar. Like, nobody cared. No. You go in, you vote, everything's fine, you walk out. I didn't think that elections largely were, I mean, they were talking about it. They were talking about how they were going to steal elections. I didn't even know what that looked like. Right.
Yeah. I was always thinking, that we live in America. We're free. That can't happen here.
And you were talking about, 2020 being a re-racked version of what you saw overseas. Where did you see these sorts of problems that you were then seeing repeat here?
Libya, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, Kenya, Uganda, DRC, Ghana. Where do you want me to start?
All the places.
I can tell you right now that there was an op going on in every single area that I went. There was a problem. And Sudan was probably one of the worst because you had the Abyei district, oil rich, going in there. I'm meeting with, the deputy director. I'm meeting with the president of Sudan, President al-Bashir. We're having conversations with guys on the outside. You had the special envoy to Sudan. They didn't have an ambassador. They had what's called a special envoy. So we're, giving information over. I'm seeing things in real time going, this can't be our policy. I'm watching Susan Rice go to the UN and lie. She's the most fraudulent person you will ever meet. She's like, nothing she says that comes out of her mouth is true. It's not true. It's not true. And
she was infamous for saying that a YouTube video was what inspired the attack in Benghazi, a YouTube video that I don't believe anybody over there had the capability of actually viewing. And that was sort of her initial rise, or at least to people's awareness of who she was. But she'd been an advisor for a long time, and she still was an advisor even in the Biden administration.
So look, the more I got into because I read a lot and I make sure that I then can match it up with what I'm seeing and then I believe half of what I see, less of what I hear, right? Because it's never true. It's always tilted towards The triggers or identifiers of that particular environment. So you have to take a little bit of the truth, because there's always a foundation to it, to make sure that it's believable. But then there's other stuff that they add into it that are, not supported by any sort of factual basis. Like most of what we see in media today is that we have that same sort of propagandist environment overseas. Only there's no arbiter of reality there, right? They just see it as that. Why are you coming in to attack me? And this happened in Egypt. And I'm sorry, people are going to not like what I have to say about Syria, but what they did to Syria and running out Bashir in Syria it's not what you think it is. It's not what you think it is.
Hopefully most people in our audience are at least tangentially aware of that, but yeah, by all means expand on it.
Yeah, it is that we are not the good guys in these countries. Like, we have destroyed the sovereignty of nations. We have made up such narratives and then used the sticks and the carrots of things like NATO and the UN and the Hague to go in there and say they've committed war crimes. And the further you get into it, the worse it gets. I mean, you look at what happened in Somalia. Like, nobody understands that there was a Western influence in Somalia, and then they pulled out and created a vacuum, and that's why you had the pirates, right? They didn't just wake up one day and say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out there and take out these vessels. Nobody came in. They came in and said, hey, look, we're going to treat you like you're poor idiots. And then when we're done doing that and we're grabbing your resources, we're just going to leave. And then you can look at like the Niger Delta and what they did in Nigeria, and that Shell went in there and created a privatized war. And then when they pulled out, oil came out of the ground and created probably one of the worst ecological disasters known to man. Yet nobody's ever there. Nobody ever talks about it. You can talk about what they did in Libya and splitting the nation in half. And frankly, while you're talking about those things, it becomes impossible for you to ignore the fact that the CIA has run more operations that have killed more people in multiple places than probably all that died in World War II. And you would say, Joe, that's not possible. Okay, well, let me walk through it with you. Let me walk through South Africa. What happened there? Let's talk about Ukraine. The Azov Battalion, 2014, the Maidan coup, the fact that you had the CIA that had to admit that they were infiltrated inside of Ukraine in 2014. They had to signal it. What happened right after that? What happened in ensuing over the 8 years that nobody talked about the war that was happening in the Donbass region, right? And the fact that the Azov Battalion is a Nazi battalion that was literally murdering women and children as target practice as they walk to school, their own people, right? But nobody reports that. We try to bury our heads in this academia, and we overvalue education and we undervalue competency and common sense, and then we never go and verify the information that's put before us. So
Can you elaborate briefly on Darfur? Because I remember I was in school at the time, and that was like the next thing that every college student was super aware of, and it was nothing but protests and signs and, I don't know, ribbon culture, whatever they were going to do to virtue signal. That was before virtue signaling was a term.
Bro,
but for you, this is just an invention.
It is made up. Okay, let me tell you something. All right, it's made up. It's not real, Steve. It is so not real that it's less than not real. It is made up. Now, were people dying? Were there conflict? Yes, there's always been conflict. Right? It's a tribal society in that environment. Yes, there's conflict. But genocide and ethnic cleansing, let me just get to it. You had the Janjaweed, the Chadian rebels, the 43 Darfurian rebel groups. You had people coming from the Libyan army. It's a country that is surrounded by 8 to 9, depending on how you do the math, other countries with a porous border. There was never any state-sponsored anything that happens. And John Norris and John Prendergast made up the organization Save Darfur. Now, do you realize that this organization Save Darfur received almost $5 billion? Darfur is a sparsely populated area that you could drive for 30, 40 miles, and you wouldn't even think God exists. You would never see a bird. You wouldn't see an animal. You would see nothing. And if you start looking at the tribal society, they've been intermarrying for thousands of years in that area. So how are you ethnically cleansing an area that's not ethnically cleansable? They're all married. I mean, it's tribal here. Here's a goat. Here's this. I mean, it truly is a very tribal environment. And I was there on the ground. I wrote a white paper, sent it up, and I was like, listen, it doesn't exist. There's no signs of it. And the only 3 examples that they had were brought to the UN by one person. What was her name?
If you tell me Susan Rice, I'm going to be really upset.
Susan Rice.
No way.
She was the original person that went to UN. Now, remember, the UN came out. First, Susan Rice went to with their deal. They went and met with President al-Bashir. And when they had that meeting, it's like, hey, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. And here are the things that we want to do, that we want you to do. So, and President Bashir was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. She's like, yeah, you are. And he's like, no, get out. Right? Now, what did Sudan have that they wanted? Well, there's this thing called the Abyei area. It sits between North and South Sudan. It's an oil-rich, mineral-rich area, probably one of the biggest in the world, right? And we wanted access to those, right? Somebody wanted access to those, because it's always the head of the snake that you can't ever get to. You don't know who it is. You don't know, but it benefits someone. It never benefits the people, right? And so chaos favors the op, doesn't favor the people. Go to the UN, go to the Hague, ethnic cleansing, genocide. You need to put a special group together that goes in and identifies it. In the middle of all that, what organization do you think was up there trying to give people aid?
USAID.
Yes. Who else? It's an organization called Doctors Without Borders. Basically a CIA strong front that has probably the most infiltrated environment you're ever going to find. And they go into these areas and they say, okay, we have this woman that says she was raped. We'll bring her in and we'll have her say that the story is that you had this soldier that was brought down there by President al-Bashir in order to rape and kill entire villages. It never happened. It never happened. Let me explain something to you. It never happened, but that was the thing that they used in order to create the DPA, the EPA, and the CPA. You had the comprehensive peace agreement that was signed down in Kenya. You had the East peace agreement that was signed, and then you had the Darfurian peace agreement. In the middle of that, you had John Prendergast and Norris that developed this Save Darfur organization, and we're going to go save the kids over there in this sparsely populated area. And then they took pictures of places that weren't Darfur, war-torn areas and conflict photographs that came from areas that had nothing to do with Darfur. And I was on the ground there. Like, I went there. I spent time on the ground, not just one bit of time, but a lot of time on the ground. And then I got to meet with President al-Bashir and ask questions. And I got to meet with other people in Sudan, ask questions. I got to go to Kanana Sugar, and which is an area out of Sudan that is not as part of the sanctioned nation status, right? So it's exempt, which is really odd, right? And by the way, through that, I got to learn about what are called TRQs and how they actually create the ability to bring sugar in. Once you understand how the sausage is made, it becomes tough to see. Like, you're like, oh my gosh. So we don't have a sugar shortage. So when they say it's not really a shortage. You're just controlling how much you actually take off the bone that you say is available, because you basically tell people they can only give you a certain amount in order to you to basically control the amount of product that's available. So, Darfur is not an anomaly, though. It's not. Everywhere the United States goes, conflict ensues. And the people in this country are ridiculous. We're the most amazing giving people, and we are represented by the most rotted apparatus that we have, that you could ever have globally. And everyone knows it. And when you look at what the Clinton Foundation did in Haiti, $6 billion. I'm telling you, none of that $6 billion went to those people. Not $1. $6 billion could have rebuilt everything with the currency controls that they have down there in place. And we could have rebuilt we could have made it what President Trump is talking about doing in Gaza with $6 billion. We could have easily created a new society in Haiti, but we didn't, because they stole it. They kept it.
It's still the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and there's not a whole lot that anybody does with it now. It's just on to the next big thing, which is what we've seen in Ukraine for the last 3 years.
What U.S. operators went down there and killed the president of Haiti. We forgot about that. These people were centered in Miami. They arrested him. You ever hear about him anymore?
No.
Well, I mean, that should be, you murdered in his own home the president of a country. No, and we forgot all about it. Let's move on to something else. And it's all because he said that he wouldn't take the vaccine or suggested his people in the country take vaccine. he was dead.
Well, on that note,
We're the good guys.
we're the good guys.
But there's a lot of good people in the government. What's
I mean, yeah,
rotted-
that's where I want to take it. So, I mean, projecting out into the future, I mean, it seems to be like there is an appetite from the public, at least, to root out a little bit of the corruption, expose what's going on. But at the same time, we are represented by a bunch of geriatrics in Washington, D.C., who are all down for, yeah, we love the Doge, but we're still going to spend the money anyway. I mean, if we were going to install a Joe Oltmann dictator for a day, I mean, could you get us back on track? What would be your top line sort of solutions that you would see, being somebody that isn't just, like Steve Friend, who doesn't want to ever leave Florida? You kind of have a more worldly perspective than I do. What would you like to see happen?
First of all, I think everything has to stand on its own 2 feet. I think you could probably cut out 50 to 60% of the government, but when you do that, cutting out the people, you create a vacuum, right? So one of the things that Elon Musk says is that if you cut really hard and you didn't feel it, then you didn't cut hard enough, right? And so we've got to start doing that on the government side. But the problem is there are people in play that want to stop that from happening. They don't care who gets the money as long as the machine continues, because the more we move the cheese, the more other things become exposed. And they just move on to these different organizations. So I would unilaterally cut out entire groups. The Department of Education would have already been gone. I would have defunded the Fed or told everybody to go home, and I would have gone to a standardized economic system where you had a board just like you do for other parts of the government. And I would make sure that things are more transparent. So I would get rid of funding on things that can get us back to square zero. I think you can cut probably $1.5 trillion out. I would renegotiate the contracts for the military industrial complex and tell them that you're no longer going to charge us, $6 billion for an airplane that you can build for, $300 million, 200, whatever it is, right? I would start looking at some of the things that they're doing across different government structures. And frankly, I would get rid of tenure for judges completely, because you want to know where the institutional rot starts in our country and where the henchmen are that basically allow for organized crime to happen in government. It's at the judiciary. The judiciary locks people up. They create private prisons. They allow for most lawyers to get around and debate the ridiculous. And frankly, it's the one that's upheld much of this deviancy that we've allowed inside of our schools and for boys and girls to be now boys, girls, and leprechauns and cats and all sorts of other stuff. So, I mean, it wouldn't take long if you just common sense cuts, and then you start giving that money back to the people and getting rid of property tax and doing things on a state level. We need to doge every state the way they're trying to doge the government. And then the leadership that's in there, day one, I would get rid of the election machines. I would get rid of the mail-in ballots. I would move to a standardized system that allowed for more transparency. And that will lead to better leadership that are inside of the legislature and inside of those things. It'd be like resetting it 120 years is what it would do.
Do you think that there's any appetite? I mean, to me, look, I travel around and I do quite a bit of speaking engagements. The issue, and it isn't number one to me, just because the FBI is like everything I care about now. I'm not saying it's not important, but election integrity is the number one issue that I see whenever I speak to any groups, which I think is probably a good thing, objectively good thing. Do you think people are concentrating on the right thing with that? Because you're more of a subject matter expert than I am on it.
Yeah. So this is where you start getting into the why and the how, right? So how did they actually infiltrate and start stealing elections? How did you get to this radical ideology that's been able to take a foothold in not just our, liberal communities, but in our conservative communities as well? It doesn't take much when you start looking at that. The people in leadership that are elected, it's only 7,500 people across the country. It's not a lot of people. You have 7,500 people that control pretty much everything, right? And then you have the unelected bureaucrats that align with them as well. But if you look at the election systems themselves, a lack of transparency and the fact that you have election systems that are not independent. You have one company, Dominion, that runs over 50% of the vote of the American people. And you don't have transparency and mail-in ballots. Tell me that you can figure out who's actually filling out that ballot. You can't. So there's no sort of line of sight. There's no transparency in the process by itself. So if you get rid of that, then you can at least see whether or not, all right, where's our medium? Where's our line medium? And then if you get rid of the education environment that's been able to creep in and push these radical ideas. That all starts with making sure that you have proper legislation. And right now we don't have it. So if you get to a place where you have paper ballots, hand counted in person, and you do it on a precinct basis, it makes cheating more difficult because it requires more people, right? And where the system that they have now, one person. Look, I wrote a model in December of 2020 after getting sued by Eric Coomer, because he said that I made up all those posts, which is a lie. Then he had to admit later they were his. But I wrote it. I sent it to Washington. I was like, this is how they're going to steal the runoff election for the Georgia runoff election for the 2 senators, right? I then took that model and I said, here are the 6 ways that they can steal the election. Well, I call them the small cons and the big con, right? The big cons being the attribution model or the adjudication process, that they have suspensions inside of that process in the tabulation system, and they could do it at a mass scale across the entire U.S. I said that they had to have internet access in order to make this happen. And everyone said, they laughed. And then I went to Washington and I presented it. And January 5th, they had the election. I told everyone, I was asked to come in there. I got briefed by people. They basically beat me up for 8 hours straight. And then the election happened on the 5th of January. John Eastman was there with me. They called and said, you need to come over here right now. And their only question was, how'd you know? And I was like, and I mean, I told them exactly what's going to happen. It'd be 50%, 50%, 50.1, and 49.9. And then the system's going to come down. It's going to come back up. And when it comes back up, it's going to flip, and the Democrats are going to have won, and they're going to celebrate it and walk off the stage. Right? I told them exactly what the PID function was, right? Which is a fixed point outcome, and how you got the big F curve in the different states. And I said, this is how you do it. This is why they did it. And it's not just the flipping of votes. It's a system that basically creates fraudulent or phantom votes. And so I was right. I predicted it to the T, like almost to the T. I didn't have any audits. I only had publicly available information and stuff that would put out with RFPs and RFIs for Dominion and ES&S. So I put it together, compressed it across states, and that's when I knew you had a national system with the same infrastructure that had the ability to steal any election at any time, at any level. They can literally pick and choose which ones they take. And there's nothing you can do about it. I went and met with counsel for Pompeo on January 6th, 2:00 in the afternoon. I walk in, and this is what nobody knows. I mean, I met with Patrick Byrne before that at the Trump Hotel before that was the new whatever it is now. And he's like, nice theory. I was like, okay, bro, that's not a theory. This is exactly how it happened, and how it's going to happen. And when I went to meet with Pompeo's counsel in a Faraday box at the State Department while everything's popping off in D.C., he looked at me, looked down, looked up, and I'm there with 4 other people, including a deputy secretary of state who served under the Trump administration the first time. And he looked at me and he said, and he stopped for a minute. He says, why would they do that? And at that moment, he knew that I knew that he knew they had stolen the election. That's why Pompeo wasn't in that meeting. And I looked at everyone. I was like, we got to get the hell out of here. Can't have cell phones, can't have everything else. So you start to see that. You'd say, Joe, you're crazy. I'm not crazy. And I wasn't crazy when I went back to the hotel room and there was a mic underneath the bed for Apollo who was watching my 6. And here's the other thing that people say, well, that seems unbelievable. Look, I have pictures, I have proof. I got I got pictures of all the stuff that I did over the 6 years in the Middle East, right? And I have one of the only surviving copies of the comprehensive peace agreement in bound form that I got as a gift from President al-Bashir in Sudan, right? So, I mean, I've got crazy stuff, but I have all the documentation to back it up, including what I came out with on the election stuff. And if you're not properly represented, then obviously you have people in the FBI that can do bad things that they did to you guys. And it was terrible what they did. And by the way, you guys got to go back. You got to go back.
It's we're on the outside, man, but it's not about us today. It's about you. I want to give you a chance. As we're closing now, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got probably 15 other meetings to get to because you just go and go and go. You are running the purveyor of the untamedtruth.com right now. And I want to pull that up because it's a good site. It's got a picture of your mug there too, by the way, Joe.
Does
The Untamed Truth.com. What's going to be offered there? What's the ultimate vision for that? Because this is one of your big projects, and I think it's looking good right now, but definitely it's going to be expanding.
Yeah. So my goal was to give people a voice. I was the COO of Frank's Beach. I took it public in 9 months. I only stepped away from that environment because, nobody ever paid me anything over the last 4 years. No one. Like Mike didn't pay me. Nobody paid me. I did all the work that I did because I truly cared about the people in my community. And so I wanted to build something. It used to be the Conservative Daily Podcast. I reach 8 to 10 million people a month on it, across multiple platforms, covered radio and cable set-top boxes and everything else. I'm in so many different places, but I didn't want to be called the Conservative Daily anymore. And I want to give people a platform where we could start pushing voices that are just reasonable, that are, that want to work the problem in our community, and maybe set aside some of the critical differences or non-critical differences that we seem to beat each other with. So now we have the Untamed Truth. We have Joe Hoft on there. I've been trying to get you guys to come over to the Untamed Nation. And we have, who else we have? We got a bunch of people. Wayne Allen Root is on there. Tommy Kerrigan is kind of the guy that I'm trying to mentor through as a podcaster. If I can get him to stop cussing every 5 minutes, it'd be great. And then you have Dave Clements. So we have a new rollout coming about mid-month this month, with a new platform that'll allow you to even upload your own content. So we're really looking forward to doing some great stuff where we can maybe have a different take on things, but and have some crazy interviews with people that we disagree with, so we can get to a place of figuring out, are they crazy? Do they actually believe what they say, or are they just mouthpieces for the fire of the breathing dragon retards that are at the top?
All right. Well, we appreciate everything you've done for us as far as elevating our voices, and I'm glad to have you on here on the American Radicals podcast, and maybe do some collaboration here coming up into the future. All right.
Absolutely.
So this is great, man. Thanks for coming on. I enjoyed just sitting here most of the time, just listening. So I'm really confident our audience did too. And it's I know it's not easy, but thank you for being open with us and vulnerable and digging into your past and how you got to where you are.
It takes a village, and we do have to establish hey, we are brothers, right? And one of my favorite Bible verses is 1 John 3:16, not John 3:16, but 1 John, and that is that Jesus gave up his life for us, so we should be prepared to give up our lives for our brothers. Amen. So it's a way to live your life, because, frankly, nobody's going to live forever.
So they say the life is the only thing that's sexually transmitted, and 100% fatality rate.
Absolutely. But I do want to see you guys go back to the FBI. I think that I'm going to hammer it till the bitter end. Cash doesn't have people to watch his back until he knows they can watch his back. And I know what the trepidation is with those that are willing to stand up, because there is this blue line. And I would just say that that's not a real blue line unless it's meant to be blue. In other words, it's meant to uphold the ideals and the values that organization is supposed to stand for. So you need to get you guys back into the FBI, and we need to start doing things to kind of clean up the mess and set new standards, and expect those standards to be kept. So,
all right, Joe. Thanks for joining us today. And we're gonna close it out here. You did a pretty good job with 1 John 3:16. Garrett, I don't know if he Jesus juked you on that one, but normally Garrett offers that, and we'll catch you next time here, Joe.
All right, take care. God bless you.
Thanks. All right.
That's awesome.
I have a palate cleanse. That was pretty intense. Garrett, why don't you give me a final thoughts here if you think you can top Mr. Oltmann?
I don't think I can top him, but we'll see. We'll see how this goes, because we'll see. I'm looking for some feedback here, because I'm going back to the well of Ephesians 6. And my idea is that I'm going to hammer it and maybe going forward, kind of pick something that is, oh boy, I don't know what I did there. Stand by. I'm trying to share my window, but with this new browser, I don't know what I'm doing. So, my idea here is to get a little more in depth, and still just with short snippets here and there, as we go. But I think it will be better if we hammer a certain piece of scripture and kind of digest it a little bit more, if I can figure out how to share my new tab over here, which I can't because of this new browser I'm using. So why don't you just do your palate cleanse? Because I don't know.
We'll get to it on Tuesday once you figure it out.
Yeah.
All right.
Joe did Jesus juke me here.
All right. So here's a palate cleanse for the day. We got 2 little boys. They don't know anything about Chuck Norris, so I'm gonna really introduce them here in the coming days to some of the awesomeness. And then I thought, well, let's just do some Chuck Norris jokes.
Did you know that I can build a snowman out of rain?
Chuck Norris once rubbed 2 fires to create a stick. Chuck Norris does guns run or walk, the earth turns for him. Chuck Norris knows Victoria's Secret. I didn't find Chuck Norris on Instagram, he found me. Once Chuck Norris hit a horse with an uppercut, and now these animals are called giraffes. Chuck Norris wears sunscreen to protect the sun. Chuck Norris was able to find the page 4004. Chuck Norris doesn't own a watch, he just decides what time it is. Chuck Norris built a hospital, he was born, and Chuck Norris told his alarm to wake up at 6. Chuck Norris has a diary, it's called the Guinness Book of World Records. Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups, he just pushes the earth away. Chuck Norris taught the book how to read. Chuck Norris can teach blind people braille and sign language. We get GTA before Chuck Norris.
It keeps going and going. It's always good. Chuck Norris jokes. All right. They don't know who he is. I'm going to do my best to probably educate them. All right. That's going to do it for us, though, today, guys, on the American Radicals podcast. Hope you all have a great weekend. Back with you Tuesday, 10:30 here on rumble.com/amradpod. If you haven't already, do smash the thumbs up, give us a follow, and subscribe on the audio formats, guys. Hope you have a great weekend. Until next time, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.